Joy Reid talking mess about the whites, of course. Here's 3 minutes of that. 3 minutes of her and Pete Buttigieg. Enjoy.
With President Biden's infrastructure deal, the largest investment in our highways since President Eisenhower, there is also an opportunity to address Eisenhower-era systemic racism in our infrastructure, something Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg noted.
I'm still surprised that some people were surprised when I pointed to the fact that if a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or it would have been, in New York was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices. I don't think we have anything to lose by confronting that simple reality.
He's gay.
Naturally, right-wingers caught all the nasty feels. Dead Cancun crews took a break from bashing Big Bird to declare the roads are racist. We must get rid of roads. Not to be outdone, Florida Governor and Baby Don, Ron DeSantis, and Tuckums Carlson had to have their say.
I heard some weird stuff from the Secretary of Transportation trying to, make this about social issues. And to me, a road's a road.
Roads can't be racist. You can't build racism into a road. They are inanimate objects. They're not alive. That seems obvious, but apparently Pete Buttigieg didn't know it.
Actually, Secretary Buttigieg does know what he's talking about. He was talking about infamously racist New York City planner Robert Moses and an anecdote in Robert Caro's 1974 biography, The Power Broker, that Moses instructed a top aide to build bridges on his new parkways too low for buses to pass because he wanted to prevent black New Yorkers and Puerto Rican New Yorkers from having access to Jones Beach State Park.
Nice.
While the Washington Post notes there's some dispute about that historian's account about that anecdote, which Caro got from the aide himself. What is not in dispute is that Moses deliberately enacted racist policies that drove black and brown people out of their homes. He even said in 1959, quote, "Our categorical imperative is action to clear the slums, and we can't let minorities dictate that this century-old chore will be put off another generation or finally abandoned," unquote.
Nice.
Moses also said highways must go through cities, not around them, and he did just that, bulldozing black, Jewish, and Puerto Rican homes for his Cross Bronx Expressway. That same kind of racist infrastructure design can be found in cities all over this country. In Syracuse, New York, the predominantly black 15th Ward was razed for an overpass for Interstate 81. Similar situations played out in New Orleans' Treme neighborhood and the multiracial Boyle Heights section of Los Angeles. There are even multiple examples in Ron DeSantis' backyard. Miami's once thriving Overtown neighborhood, once the Harlem of the South, was decimated to make way for I-95. And in the Tampa area where DeSantis grew up, communities founded by the formerly enslaved were demolished for an interstate. So Pete Buttigieg was right. And the same Republicans who rail against the teaching of institutional racism are willfully ignoring the well-documented history of racism that is literally baked into America's infrastructure. Or maybe they're just ignorant to it because they didn't learn about it in school, which is why it's so important to teach about institutional racism. And for that, Cruz, DeSantis, and all the other ignorant folk who are trying to erase the past, you are tonight's absolute worst.
What a phony lady, huh? What is that called when it's not manifest destiny. What is it? Imminent domain. That's called imminent domain. And you tear down the failing areas because they have less to lose. But no, it's racism. Phony woman. Typical phony woman. Let me get to Jeff in Louisiana.
You look back in the 60s now, and granted the laws were screwed up then.
I don't know.
All that stuff, this all stuff was screwed up then, but
I don't know how messed up they truly were because we don't get the whole story. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like we don't know why they were trying to deal with this diversity problem, and they probably had lower crime than we have today.
Yeah, they probably did. But I'm saying is that there was, if you look in the history books, it may be right or wrong, but there was a reason they were doing that.
Right.
It wasn't like, well, a black dude goes on drugs and commits crimes and robs people and all this stuff, and now he's dead, so let's blame the white cop. Or a white kid goes into another county and Now we can bust him for 20 million crimes because a white person, 3 white people are trying to kill him. Not a black person, 3 white people are trying to kill him.
Right. Just not normal whites. Yeah.
So it's like, man, just we're screwed. The white people are screwed.
Well, fear not. Fear not. I appreciate it, Jeff. Nice to hear from you, man. Take care.
Okay.
All right. Let me get to AZZMADOR in Texas. Wants to talk about the infrastructure. So racist. What's up, AZZMADOR?
Hey, how's it going, James?
Going well. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, I do. That's my main thrust. I want to talk about the infrastructure. And it may not surprise you to know that I'm pro racist roads and bridges. But
yeah.
I'd like to address something that the caller just said, and I have 2 quick points first.
Okay.
The laws that he's talking about that were bad or whatever in the past, they weren't bad at all. They were excellent laws. And if you're an American and you believe in the principles that America was founded on, then you are pro-segregation, because all that means is, in the most basic sense, is freedom of association. I'm pro 100% freedom of association. If people, if there are some blacks or Hispanics or whatever that you want to associate with, fine. But if you want to live somewhere where you don't live around them or whatever, then you should be allowed to, because there's no such thing as freedom of association without freedom from association.
Yeah.
But
forced integration is evil. Yep.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. The 2 quick points I wanted to make before I get into this, though, are, first of all, liberals always claim that they want to make the world a better place, but Kyle Rittenhouse already did.
Yeah.
And the second point is
true.
I heard. I would advise anyone. Well, I'm not going to advise anyone. I'm just going to say, in my own personal opinion, I would never hire Joe, the caller Joe, as an attorney, because he called into Jesse's show and got a bunch of stuff wrong about Kyle's trial. But the main thing was, he kept saying that there was no evidence for homicide. There's abundant evidence for homicide because there are 2 dead bodies.
Right.
But what there's no evidence for is murder. And if someone were actually an attorney, I would expect them to know the difference.
Yeah.
But
homicide
anyway,
is not a crime. Homicide is not a crime.
Homicide is the act of killing someone, and it's a crime if you do it without justification, and it's not if there is justification.
Yep.
But at any rate, the thing about the racist roads and bridges, if everything Joy Reid was saying was true, then good for that city planner, because
yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm being serious about this, because the greatest theft of wealth and resources from any particular demographic group that you've ever seen anywhere is the theft of wealth and resources from white America following desegregation and forced integration. And here's why. You had white neighborhoods, white sections of town, and so forth. It had always been that way. And in that situation, you would have a white family that owned a house, and they would live in it until the parents and then grandparents, whatever, got old and died, and they would leave it to another member of the family. And that would be familial wealth that got passed along. And you also, your neighborhoods were all in the same part of town, and you had business districts and so forth that served that part of town. You had government services that served that part of town, and all of this had been built by white America. So then the next thing you know, they go to forcing the neighborhoods into having blacks move in. And they had a term for the people who took advantage of the desegregation. They called them blockbusters. They would go and spend whatever amount of money they had to spend, these real estate hustlers, and they would buy one house in a white neighborhood and move blacks into it.
Yeah.
And that would cause white flight. And then they were able to buy, once the first few whites had sold their houses, when the word got out that the houses were being sold because blacks were moving in, these real estate people who moved the original black family and would be able to buy them up for almost nothing and either rent them out or sell them to blacks. But
What a scam.
I had this personal experience in my life with it. The neighborhood that I lived in for until I was in fourth grade was a nice, not that old, but kind of an old neighborhood. It was adjacent to a pretty old neighborhood in the city, and you had everything there that you needed, and it was completely like monocultural. Everybody in the neighborhood was white. They were all Protestants. You know, it was very monocultural, and it was very high trust. We could get on our bicycles in the morning and ride our bicycles to school, and you know, as long as we were home by dark, mom never had to worry
Yeah.
that something bad would happen to us. Well, they did this, and in about 1976, I believe, they moved a black family into the neighborhood. And the second that my dad heard about that, he said, "Okay," and the sign went up.
Wow.
Outside the house for sale, and we moved out. And just a few years later, when I got my driver's license, I drove through there, and it was a complete ghetto. This really nice neighborhood.
What a
The houses
shame.
were trashed. The lawns weren't kept. It was an unsafe place. But what happens every time this happens is all the white people have to move, and there's really no place for them to move. So what they do is they have to build new cities. They build suburbs,
Yeah.
and they move out to them. They move out to them, and they have to build new roads, new businesses, new government services, and everything. And the DFW Metroplex is the perfect example of this. When they would do that, they would build a new suburb like Irving, right? And it would be a nice white place until at some point they would try to bring the DART, the Dallas Area Rapid Transit. They would want to set up buses out there. And the city would fight it. The media would attack them and say that it was racist, that the only reason they didn't want the buses out there was because the buses would be a black American delivery system, right?
Yep.
Which that really was the reason. And there's nothing wrong with that, because finally they would relent because they were being called racists.
What a shame.
They would allow the buses to come into their town, and within a couple of years, it was all a crime-ridden mess, or becoming one, and the whites would flee and build new suburbs, and all that wealth being lost, all that wealth that should be getting transferred from generation to generation, or that should be a thing that people are being able to save instead of spending all these new taxes on new government and new roads and all this other stuff, because somehow we got the idea that every race has some kind of an unalienable right to have access to members of other races who don't want to associate with them.
Yeah. Wow, what a scam. I had not considered that aspect of it, of how they just have to keep on moving and running and building and moving and running and building. And because you see what happens when they just destroy. It's so destructive.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's worse than you really think, because, we've been so conditioned and brainwashed to accept this that we don't see it for what it is. And what it is an aspect of genocide. And I'm going to quote right now from the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It's got 5 aspects to it. And this kind of stuff is part of 2 of the, and you could say 3 of the aspects or indicators that acts are being committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And the main one is C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Now, you could say that when they ended segregation in the 60s, that they didn't know. That wasn't the intent. But they have kept enforcing it and kept enforcing it and kept enforcing it. You even have, like, the Obama administration and the Biden administration paying for ghetto single mothers to bring their broods into nice neighborhoods, paying them extra.
Redistribution of ghettos. That's HUD doing that.
Yeah. and that creates a condition right there in a place where whites have lived forever, or where they have just spent a whole bunch of money to have a safe place with safe schools and all that for their kids to live. It creates conditions calculated to bring about their physical destruction in whole or in part, and also D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And, our birth rate is way down, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not even saying this is even the main one, but when you cannot assure yourself that you're going to have a nice neighborhood where you don't have to worry when your children leave the house and ride their bicycle 3 or 4 blocks over to the park that there's not going to be drug dealers and kidnappers and, who knows what else out there. That is the type of thing that, whether they're thinking about it logically on a conscious level or not, that makes people feel like, I don't want to bring kids into this world.
Right. Yep. You hear people say that. You hear whites say that, educated whites. Liberals and conservatives sometimes. Yeah.
Well, and you can see I'm not saying they're right, but you can see why they feel that way because, I'm in my 50s, so and I'm also from a rural, very conservative area that I grew up in. So I know the world that, unfortunately, guys younger than me or from different parts of the country than me never got to experience. And that was a world where you had a white monoculture where white men, white Christian men ran everything. And it was so much of a different thing.
It was not this evil thing that people pretend that it was.
Right. And what they have done to this country since I was a young man is a horrible thing. I went back a year or two ago. I went back to the old neighborhood that I'm talking about, and I drove around there, and I drove around that part of town looking at the various places that I used to go hang out, the parks that I went to, school that I went to, and everything. And I was the only white person for miles, and it wasn't even blacks now. It was full of not just Hispanics, but like illegal aliens.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, as I gaze around at these strangers in town, I guess the only stranger is me. And that's what they've done to us, and we have got to put a stop to it. And the only way we're going to put a stop to it is to stop allowing these people to make us feel guilty about our past. And, oh, my God, the laws back then were so bad, and all this. When you allow people to say things like, that the Confederacy was a bad, evil thing, or that the segregation and the Jim Crow and all this was such a bad, evil thing, if you go along with that, what you are doing is you're playing right into their narrative that your ancestors were evil, your very own blood relatives were evil, denounce them.
And they weren't.
I'm sorry. I refuse. I absolutely refuse. No, they were the best people in the world. all these people that they denounce are 1,000 times greater men than anyone who's denouncing them.
Yeah. Even without knowing much history, I instinctively know that they're lying, because look at how dishonest these people are. They smear the Southerners today are bright, honest people, the Christians. They hate Trump. They hate Jesse. They hate the best people. So they're not honest.
Yeah.
Interesting, man. I appreciate the history lesson, AZZMADOR.
Yeah. All right.
Well, take care, man.
You too.
All right.